Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to I'm talking with I guess a fan who said he had some questions about theistic evolution, and there was some difficulties getting on together. There's a problem with the microphone.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I was here once before, right? And
Uh,
some might have seen that.
yeah, you've got an awful lot of echo in there. What mic are you using?
I don't know, frankly.
Okay. All right. So you don't have a microphone on a headset. Are you using a?
No, I don't have a microphone or headset.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just try to get through this. What was your question then?
Yeah, you mean what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah.
We're just going to discuss theistic evolution. Remember last time it was eternal security I discussed with you?
No, I'm sorry.
You don't?
No, something about internal security. What?
Yeah, it was eternal security.
Eternal security. What's that?
It's once saved. What's the belief of once saved?
Oh, once saved, always saved. Yeah. Okay, I remember that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess you've had some podcasts since then, right?
Yeah. And always busy. So, what about? I don't know that if it's your position, but I'm kind of not the one to talk about theistic evolution since it's not my thing. For me, theistic evolution is kind of like what Carl Sagan said about people trying to understand how a radio works. They would think, well, there's little tiny people in the radio playing music, little tiny musicians,
Right.
and then you try to explain to them how radio really works, and then somebody says, "But are you sure there's not just a few little musicians in there?" So theistic evolution is okay. Well, this isn't magic, and this isn't magic. But are you sure there's not some magic back there somewhere if we go far enough?
I'm not sure that's what that would be a straight analogy as to what I believe as far as theistic evolution.
Okay.
But let's see, what was I going to say? Yeah. Some people, there's different types of theistic evolution, though. Is that not correct? There's different types of theistic evolution.
What were those different types?
Well, actually, what I was thinking of would not qualify quite as theistic evolution. Deism is a little bit different, correct? That's when God wound everything up at the beginning.
I mean, the words mean different things. Theism is it's a belief system that focuses on a God, and then theology is the construct, the understanding of how that God functions, or that pantheon works, or whatever, the collective mythos that go involved in all of that. And evolution is just biodiversity via population mechanics or population genetics, if you prefer. And theistic evolution is exactly that, but somehow started by magic.
I don't think it necessarily started by magic.
Okay, you think guided by magic?
I would say started and guided. Although,
how is it guided?
What I was thinking, generally, I don't consider it magic. But if you break it down to just how is God doing this, is He just plain willing things to happen? If so, maybe you could call that magic.
If it's the supernatural, if it's supernatural powers or entities that are used to control or forecast natural events in ways that are inexplicable by science, then that's by definition.
It could be a natural way
that
God is doing it. There could be it's something that, if so, we, our physicists and such, haven't gotten, or we may never be able to figure it out. Maybe we can't. Maybe we can at some point. Who knows?
All right.
But
okay. Never mind. Go ahead.
What I do believe is God is manipulating some way the laws of physics and chemistry, and DNA in order to create life on Earth.
Okay. Well, there's no need for a God to do anything. These are all things that happen as result of physics and chemistry. So why would you imagine that there's a God involved?
Well, I think it's not so much that there needs a God is required for evolution to work, but I think everything in evolution points to God, or just about everything.
Can you show anything that points to God?
Yeah, in a minute. Let me think. Theistic evolution. We talked a little bit about the last time I was on talking about eternal security. You may not have remembered that much, but I also suggested theistic evolution as a possible topic. There at the end, I talked a little bit about it. I thought God was using physics and chemistry to create life rather than, what you were saying. I mean, generally what creationists believe.
Okay,
It
why?
was basically wizardry if you're a young Earth creation anyway, just 6,000 years ago.
Okay, why?
Because you're aware of the evolutionary process, and when they teach the evolution, they just basically tell what's happened. They don't deal whether there's a God or not. They just tell what happened.
Why would we deal with what is there to deal with? We have a thing that is not evidently possible, much less probable, much less
Yeah, you
involved.
mean God is
We don't
not
have
possible.
any indication that a God exists or it even can be involved in any way.
Evolution.
There is literally nothing to
Well,
deal
that's
with.
why we need to talk about the teleological argument. I mentioned that in your comments. And you know what that is, don't you? I think it's the Watchmaker, or same thing as the Watchmaker argument. Am I right?
I asked you why you believe there's a God involved, and instead of answering that question, you said that when they teach evolution, they don't deal with whether there's a God or not.
Right.
When they teach atomic theory,
what happened?
when they teach atomic theory in chemistry class, do they there deal with whether there's a God or not?
No, it's the same thing as
No.
evolution. Because
So what
we
you
know
don't
the
do it in
rules of
atomic
physics.
theory, why would you do it in
No,
evolution?
evolution happened. And you and I agree on that. It
And
happened.
continues to happen,
No.
and we know, and these are the
And it
different
does
ways in
continue
which
to
it
happen.
happens.
Yes, it's true.
What?
It does continue to happen. That's true.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah,
and at
science
no
class, they
point.
just tell what happened. So,
Okay.
I think the idea, I'm not talking about something I think should be taught in the science class.
I'm just reeling over the notion that when we teach how populations diversify, how we're talking about population genetics, right? At what point do we need to deal with whether there's a God or not?
Well, I think we need to deal with whether there's a God or not. If we're talking philosophy, I think a philosophy class could
population
deal
genetics,
with
right?
atheistic or theistic evolution.
Right. We're talking about population.
Not
When we are talking about population genetics, we're not talking about philosophy, are we?
Right.
Right. So
Yes, so we wouldn't talk about
if
that.
you want to go navel gazing and pontificating about things that are not probable, well, you can go, find some other course where you can do that. But today we're going to teach you how population genetics works, how populations diversify, and you can go ponder your magic imaginary friend somewhere in some other class.
Yeah, that's right. Let's see, where was I?
Why you believe there's a God involved, and I'm still waiting for the answer.
You've seen pictures of God, God as a man, anthropomorphic pictures of God, and have you ever noticed that he looks something like Gandalf?
No.
You haven't?
No, I've never seen a picture of God that looked like Gandalf.
Well, he looks like a wizard of some kind.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. I could have
Okay.
said Dumbledore.
And so that's why you believe that that a God exists and is somehow guiding evolution?
No, sir. I think if I were going to show God as a human being, a better representation of that would be a scientist in a lab coat. Because he's using science. Think of the Earth as his laboratory, and he's using
I have to apologize
chemistry and physics to create life.
I have to apologize for losing patience with this so very quickly, but I want to get back to you where you said everything in evolution points to God, but you cannot show me anything that points to God.
Okay, I can't show you anything that goes to God.
I asked you to show me, and you said you could, but then
Okay,
you
if I
started
can
talking about
solve,
different. But then
I
you,
can
but
solve.
then you started talking about different things. So show me something in evolution that points to God.
Are you familiar? You know what the watchmaker argument is, don't you?
Of course, the
Yeah,
failure of the watchmaker
right.
argument, because every argument for God is logically invalid. The problem with Paley's watchmaker is that it determines that we know the distinction between a watch which cannot be reproduced, or it cannot reproduce itself, right? It has to be constructed. And we
Right.
find this amongst on a beach full of sand, or among the rocks, or out in the dirt, whatever. And we contrast the watch, which has to be manufactured by hand, with all of these other things to recognize that the watch, and only the watch, is intelligently designed, because we
Right.
compare the watch to the rocks it's sitting on.
Right.
And then we go to the further assumption that the watch means that, because the watch was designed, means that the rocks were designed. So every every argument for God has flawed premises, all of them, and usually, and in this case certainly, the conclusion is a non sequitur. You don't have a single logically valid argument for God.
Okay, you used rocks. I was thinking more on the order of life, plants, animals, things like that. And I think
Yours doesn't make.
most people who use
Do
the
we have to
teleological
manufacture?
argument
Do we
are
have to
talking about
manufacture
that,
animals?
like a living cell. You've heard
Yeah. Do we have to
theists
manufacture animals?
who are theists.
Do we have to
We
manufacture
don't, but
animals?
God does, and He uses evolution to do it.
Is there a problem with the audio? Do we have to manufacture animals?
We don't. I think.
No. No. Why? Why is that?
No.
Why? Why is that?
Well, I guess we're getting into genetic engineering, and maybe when we get into genetic engineering, maybe then we
You really
can.
need to get into genetic engineering to put your mind back to like 600-700 years ago, or 6,000-7,000 years ago, and understand that, mommy cow and a bull, they produce a calf, right? You don't need to get into genetic engineering to understand that moms and dads make babies, right? It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. So we know that animals reproduce themselves, and so do plants. And that when they reproduce, their reproductions, their products, are not absolute clones. They're all different from each other, and slightly different from their parents as well. And this will accumulate differences as time goes on. So watches do not reproduce themselves. We have to manufacture them.
Yeah, that's true.
Animals, we don't have to manufacture them. They reproduce themselves. So that's why Paley's argument fails. Now,
Okay, so
wait. Show me something, anything in evolution that points to God.
Okay. I got a book here. I think I use this other book. I could use any number of things like this.
Okay, pick one.
See, this is on whale evolution of aquatic mammals.
Okay.
I lost my page, sorry about that. Do you see the diagram there? I'm sure you know about the evolution of whales, but you see the
Yes,
diagram.
I did a 3-part series on the evolution of whales.
Yeah, I've seen that.
You saw that series?
Yeah, I mentioned, at least I've seen a few. I think I've seen all of them, yeah. I mentioned it last time when we talked about Basilosaurus versus Zeuglodon. You don't remember when?
Yeah, I do remember something about that.
Yeah, okay. So you're starting with Masonic up here. Paracahyena. anyway, these are methylonic. It's Tacitus is supposedly the first one. I remember when they discovered it back in the, I think in the 90s. You have Ambulocetus. This one is Dalonistus, Rhodocetus, Tacitus, and the Basilosaurus or Zeuglodon.
Okay.
And you notice, you see the different stages, and
it's not just stages. You understand that each one of these is a proliferation. So you have.
They branch out. They don't just.
Right. So you end up with things like Georgiacetus, which ended up where you have things like. It's important that you hear some of the things that I say. So in the case of Georgiacetus, for example, the animal's unable to walk because its pelvis has been separated from the spine. And it's not relying on its tail for propulsion for whatever reason. If you've seen the animations of Ambulocetus, the way that it undulates, it doesn't focus its energy on its tail. In the animations, it focuses its energy on its hind legs to do that. Right. So now the way that whales developed, the whales that we know, they focus their energy on their tail. They use their tail for the propulsion, and over time that goes that way. But the Georgiacetus went more like the animation showed, where it relies on its flippers. So the tail ends up not being very big, and its flippers are. So this ends up being a dead end completely. So this is almost everything that ever evolved is extinct now. And every time there's a proliferation, when there's a mass extinction event, you'll have just a few survivors, but then they branch into hundreds of different varieties, and then there's another mass extinction, and all of them die out except for 3 or 4 or 5, and that's it. You got hundreds of different examples all going extinct over and over again with just a few survivors to proliferate after that. How does that point to a god?
It points to God because these different, if you notice, if human beings invent something, it goes through different stages. Like just take something like, say, airplanes. When they first developed
do human beings
aircraft,
okay,
each stage, they get more.
So you're saying that
God
is
generally more complicated, and they
you're saying that
more
hold on. You're saying that God is a tinkerer who makes a whole bunch of different varieties of everything. He makes it look exactly like it would if it would have looked if there was no God. He completely hides his own involvement here, so that he ends up doing an arms race to make the cheetahs faster than the impalas, and make the impalas fast enough to outrun the cheetahs, and keep that arms race going. So he's playing both sides of every fence to make it look like he's not there, I guess, as a test of our faith. And you think that his absolute absence and whole inefficiency and imperfection and trial and error point to God?
I don't see this as inefficient. It looks pretty efficient to me.
Almost everything,
just efficient as human beings.
If almost everything ends up dead out of every generation, almost every new form dies, with just a handful that continue. How is that not inefficient? How is that not the most grossly inefficient thing ever?
Well, each one of these different species that you see here are they fill some kind of ecological niche.
Not all of them. Well, I mean, they will always fill something. But the problem is, again, they all go extinct.
They fill a purpose, in other words.
No, they don't have a purpose. All of them go extinct. They all struggle. They all die. And all of them go extinct except a handful, maybe. And sometimes you'll have this handful that will continue on, or they all go extinct, as has happened over and over again. We don't have any trilobites. We don't have any ammonites. The orthocones are all gone. There are so many things that don't exist at all anymore. No survivors whatsoever. How does that point to God? A bunch of failed experiments.
Okay, I don't consider these failed experiments because
if they're all extinct, all of them.
The environment changes.
Right, just like it would be if there was no God.
I think you've probably heard it said that the dinosaurs were very successful for the time they lived.
You're saying God killed them?
Crash into the earth. Do you think that makes the dinosaurs therefore failure?
So you think God killed them?
Huh?
Do you think God killed them?
Perhaps he wiped the slates clean to start over.
Uh-huh.
I
And he did
remember
it in a way that looks exactly like if there was no God.
my dad telling me, this is gonna, I guess this probably sounds kind of silly, but he told me, look how many of the dinos in these books are bipeds. And he said, you know something, I think the creator was trying to develop some type of being, but it didn't work out, and they started working on the monkey. Maybe something like that was the case.
Uh,
What do you
okay,
think?
yeah, my grandpa would say things like that when he had got a couple of beers in him.
Would he?
But that's not wisdom. And trial and error experiments do not imply a God. Blind repetition, where almost everything is a failure, does not imply a God. And the way that animals live and die in the wild, how do most animals die? What happens when they get old?
They just get old and die.
Well, they don't just
A
die.
lot of animals die awful deaths.
Yeah, animals just in general, when it comes to death, they die horribly.
I feel
Over
sorry.
it, and just it's always been that way. I forget who the author was who said that nature is red in tooth and claw. Does that point to God?
Well, I think you're trying to, I don't think it points away from God. I think you're trying to say that that shows there's no loving God. And I'm not talking about a loving
Okay,
God.
so you believe
I'm
in
just talking
Carlin's God.
about a supreme being.
You believe in George Carlin's God, who doesn't give a shit.
I'm not sure who George Carlin is. But
Wow. Okay, so I got to get you.
Sounds familiar.
I got to get you a link. Yeah, the man doesn't know who George Carlin is. Okay. All right, so all these things that really do point away from God and that do not point to God, we'll just have to set aside because you're not getting the big picture here. Point to me something that, or tell me about something that points to God, not away from it.
Well, this is my opinion, but I already showed you the different stages you can see in the different.
Right. You showed me a misunderstanding of something that does not.
I'm not going to be able to show you anything you're going to agree with, and you're going to say,
Right.
wow.
Yeah, but you're not going to show anything that would, if there was a God, then you would be able to do this. If there really was a God, there would be things you could point to. There would be things that God would do. And
I'm already pointing to things, but what would you?
You already pointed to things that would only be that way without a God, or without a God who gave us that.
I don't think evolution could even work without a God.
You don't. Evolution cannot not work. Just set it on automation. Release any population of anything into any environment, and watch when you and separate that population into two or more groups. Geographically isolated between like put one set on, and they're all the same animal, but put one set on an island, put some on mountains, and put one on either side of a river or a gulf, and then come back 100 generations later. You will see.
We'll find different separate species.
Yes, you will. And what do we call speciation? What kind of evolution? Macroevolution, when it creates a new species. That's macroevolution. So what you would end up with, new species, macroevolution, inevitably, invariably, without a God. And you said evolution can't work unless there's a God doing it. Well,
I think there has to be a God. There's intelligence controlling that. Tells me there's intelligence.
Obviously not. It's a completely automated system. There is no intelligence involved. If you want to postulate that there is an intelligence, you got to give us a reason to think that.
Okay. What about these changes come about by changes in the DNA? And what I often tell people is, now I'll tell you about Darwin's theory. If I'm right, according to Darwinian theory, evolution is natural. Well, I guess I'm talking about natural selection here. Random mutation, natural selection, random mutations.
Darwin didn't know about mutations.
He didn't know about mutations.
Yeah, Darwin knew that there were heritable units of information passed down.
Okay, but you know what they were.
But he didn't know what universe. Yeah, it was Gregor Mendel who figured out that Darwin's dilemma was answered by genetics, and then there was the question of, well, where do new varieties come from? And that was Hugo de Vries that realized that genes can mutate and produce new information. Now, creationists constantly insist that this doesn't happen, but this is a well-established fact throughout biology.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
in many instances of observed evolution now, scientists have gone into to identify exactly what mutation, exactly where, what type of mutation it was. Was it a frame shift mutation or a missense mutation that caused this, when they're talking about point mutations anyway, that caused this or that change? And how it resulted in the newly acquired feature or what have you. And we know that these are copying errors. This is just a genetic mistake and does not require a magic imaginary being.
Okay. I would disagree with you because what I tell people is that those changes, those mutations, at least all the beneficial ones, were designed there by a God. That's why
Yes,
they
you
were
make
there.
the empty,
The
unsupported
mutations are intentional. They are not mistakes.
Okay,
At least the
in
ones
science.
that are an
Whoa,
advantage.
wait. In science, if you were to say something is true and you don't have any evidence to show that it is true, well, you can't. When scientists can't even say that something is probably true unless they can show that a probability exists. But when you make an unsupported assumption and then you assert it as if it's a fact, and you don't have any way to back it up to test whether it's a fact or not, when you just say that a God does these things, you know what they call that in science? If a scientist were to say something like that, we'd call it fraud.
Well, what I'm saying,
you cannot
I told
say
you that this would belong in the philosophy
you
department.
hello, you cannot say that things are true until you can show that they are true. In the meantime, you're welcome to speculate all you want to, but if you can't show that there's any truth to what you're saying, then shut up.
Okay, so you want to just not talk anymore?
No, that's what I'm saying. That's how it is in science. You cannot just say things are true if you can't show that it's true.
No, you can't.
It's called lying.
Okay.
So when you tell me that, oh, I disagree with you because God designed that. No, you disagree with me because you imagine. You disagree with me because you imagine that a God does that. You don't know that a God does that. And that's my biggest problem with faith, pretending to know things you don't know. That's what faith is.
I didn't say I knew it. I didn't say that I was bringing in proof today.
Well, you did say that you disagree because a God designed those and that evolution can't work without a God. Those are both two statements of fact that are not facts.
That's what
we call those lies.
That's what I believe. So you're calling me a liar, right?
If you state something to be true that is not evidently true and that you can't even know that it is true, then yes, that's a lie. My favorite quote from Abraham Lincoln was that it is an established maxim in morals that he who makes an assertion without knowing whether it is true or false is guilty of falsehood. And the accidental truth of the assertion does not justify or excuse him. So yeah, if you say that something is true and you don't know that it's true, meaning you can't show that it's true, then yes, you have just lied. And that's what religion is.
Okay, I was going to say some other things.
Go ahead.
The theological argument, the Watchmaker argument, I hear that applied a lot of times to the word they are talking about. There's so much complexity and intricate complexity, like even in a single cell. And the feather of a bird, it's, things that look to be purposefully designed. Even Richard
I don't know how you get looks to be purposefully designed.
Well, even Richard Dawkins says that there's an illusion of that being designed.
There is an illusion of design in incidental constructs. It will eventually produce something that that has a function or that can function a particular way. And if it does, well, then it has the potential of being improved. So there is an illusion of design in that respect. But complexity does not imply what you think it does. You must be thinking that, well, this is really, really complex. It must have been a very smart person that designed this. But when I took my my biology courses, I was impressed at how convoluted and unnecessarily complex and indefensibly inefficient a lot of these biological systems were. I'm like, who would design such a ridiculous Rube Goldberg system?
Yeah.
And then I read a hallmark of intelligent design would be inefficient simplicity. That this excessive complexity that is inefficient can only come about from an incidental, haphazard assemblage. Unintended. That's what the complexity means.
Okay.
It's way too complex.
Once again, I disagree with you.
Doesn't matter that you disagree with me. It only matters why, and you don't have a why.
I was just going to tell you why.
You don't have a why. You have that you want to make believe, and that's not a why. You have to give me facts and evidence against the position. I believe in fairies is not a fact and evidence against the position.
Don't you want us to hear why?
Yes, I want to hear why, but I also want you to understand. I want you to understand when you tell me what you think is a why it isn't one. Why it's not a fact and evidence to make me think as you do.
I'm telling you what I think. Okay. So you won't call me a liar again. Okay.
Okay.
I'm making sure it's just my opinion, so I'm not stating something out of the textbook. Okay. Guess what? Rube Goldberg devices, they're created by humans. They are created, they're designed by humans.
Right.
So they didn't develop by themselves as a lot of creation.
It's somebody who's being unnecessarily complex. The Rube Goldberg system is unnecessarily complex, and so is biology.
Yes. Well, you know who Michael Behe is?
Of course. The guy who lied on stand, the guy who exposed, who accidentally, inadvertently, unwittingly exposed intelligent design creationism as a fraud and a criminal conspiracy to get around the laws against teaching religion in schools.
He accidentally
that guy. Did that? What?
I didn't know whether he did that or not, but I read his book back in college.
Yeah, well, he also testified in Kitzmiller versus Dover.
I read Darwin's Black Box.
Yeah, I'm sorry because you've read a lot of misinformation. So
well, I don't agree with him. I did not say some things I agree with, but mostly in general I don't agree with him.
Well, why did you ask me if I know who Michael Behe is?
If I don't agree with him,
and if I don't agree with him, and you don't agree with him, then why is he relevant?
I agree with him. I want you to make a point because he talks about irreducible complexity.
And every argument for irreducible complexity was refuted in science before it was exposed as fraudulent in a court of law.
I'm not finished.
Okay.
One example he gave was the blood clotting system, how one protein knocks into another protein. They just create this. You have a bleeding disorder if you're missing any one of those. He knows that's
yes, that was brought up in Kitzmiller versus Dover, and you should read how the court.
I did not know. I wasn't finished yet. And he talks about how you need to have every part for it to work. And I think that's what is meant by irreducible complexity. Am I right about that?
Yes, and as I told you already, every argument for irreducible complexity that Behe presented had already been refuted even by Christian biologists in science before it was exposed as fraudulent in a court of law. So Behe, the judge wanted to put Behe up on perjury charges, but was advised against it because of the religious nature of the witnesses and that it would not reflect well if he charged them with perjury.
I vaguely remember that trial, and I know that he's the one who lost. Okay.
So why bring up Behe, a guy you don't agree with, a guy I don't agree with, who's talking about a thing that's already been disproved? Why even mention him?
Do you want me to keep talking about him or not?
Why would I want you to keep talking? Why would I want you to start talking? Why did you want to start talking about a guy you don't agree with, who I don't agree with, and whose postulations have already been disproved? Why even bring him up?
The blood clotting system. I do agree with him that is manufactured. That has to be manufactured by an intelligence. It's Rube Goldberg-like, and Rube Goldberg machines are created. We know that they're created by humans. The blood clotting system was created by God. Oh, I lied again. Sorry
Excuse
about
me.
that.
Excuse me. Like, not just that one time. Not just that one time. You're still missing that Rube Goldberg designed these systems to be unnecessarily complex.
On purpose.
On purpose. He did it wrongly on purpose to make it as inefficient as he possibly could, which is not the way that a god would work, is it?
I think you have me there. All right. I think you got me on that.
Okay.
I don't really
and
have.
Then, as I said,
I don't really have a good response as to why God would make it so much like a Rube Goldberg device, since that was the intent of him to make devices as complex as he could.
Yeah. And then the blood clotting cascade. I can't remember I'm for whatever reason my file won't pull up on it. I have notes for how the judge ruled on each of these claims that Behe made, and I wish I could pull up the one that the court said about the blood clotting cascade and how Behe just omits by design any of the explanations from science. And the most famous line of there was when Behe said that science would never have an explanation for this thing. I don't remember which one of the thing. Maybe it was the blood clotting thing. I don't remember. But the answer was that because they all had an actual scientist, they had Kenneth Miller as their star witness, and he wrote the biology textbooks on evolution for across our colleges, and he's a traditional Catholic. So we've got a Christian biologist who's supporting evolution, who already knew exactly what lie Behe was going to tell on the stand. So they brought like 26 books and peer-reviewed research articles and other such things, of like a stack of them, to put them on the table of where it had already explained what Behe said science will never explain. And the judge complained that Behe's response was that it wasn't good enough. Certainly not good enough to convince him. Basically what he did was, I don't agree with you because I think a god had to be involved. No reason. Just that. Yeah, you want to believe in a god, and that's it. That's all.
Well, I think Behe also compared things like that, such as a cell, for example, to a mousetrap. You have to have all these different parts for it to work. Missing one part, it won't work at all.
Uh-huh.
Now, there is also the 70s game mousetrap, which is a Rube Goldberg machine.
And then Kenneth Miller showed how you can have another function by removing part of a mousetrap and making it into a tie clip.
And it has a different function.
Yes, and then they showed for every one of the examples that Behe brought up, they showed how the evolutionary pathway was different than what they said. So it started as the bacterial flagellum started out as a type 2 secretory system. And the judge is understanding this, but Behe, who has a biology degree, it refuses to understand this because he desperately needs to pretend that there is a God. And that's it, and that's all. It's just an emotional, irrational want to believe that there's a God there.
Okay. So, if I remember, there's a quote from Behe somewhere about this, that someone asked him about the mousetrap, the real mousetrap, how it's designed, and they asked him, how did if you're talking irreducible complexity, how did all these parts get there together so that they're working? And he said, as I remember it, in a puff of smoke. He literally said that. I'm not saying that, but he actually said that.
He actually said what?
He said that when asked how a mousetrap, how it was designed, he said in a puff of smoke.
Yeah, because he's
Literally.
being
a puff of smoke.
facetious.
Right. Okay.
So not relevant to our discussion at all.
Right. But
So I'm
these different
still
pieces,
looking for, why do you believe there's a God involved? And what I'm getting is that you just really want to pretend there's a God, and that's the only reason.
okay. Well, you just mentioned how the different parts can be repurposed, like a earlier stage of the mousetrap would function as something else. That's something like how, let's say, the eye developed.
What?
You know, the development of the eye.
Of course, the most
It
classic evolutionary explanation.
you would have to start out millions of years in the sea with just some photoreceptive cells. And then gradually one part developed and another part developed and another part developed as needed, as the eye got more complex and it was needed for.
Well, I wouldn't say as needed, because there are still plenty of animals that still run very primitive types of eyes. So it's
I'm
not
sure there
as
are, because they're not like vertebrate eyes when they got up to the stage of vertebrate.
And you have some invertebrates that have better eyes than we do.
Like the octopus and squid. You think
Right.
the name of the mollusk?
Yes.
I'm a little bit confused about that, because Richard Dawkins argued that the eyes of the octopus and the squid are more advanced. I think they're more efficient. We have something that goes clear around the eyes. You know, it has to make a detour. But it doesn't for the octopus. But then I think he also said that our eyes are more efficient. So
Yeah.
vertebrate
Because
eyes. So
because if we were talking about incidental designs. We were talking about incidental designs earlier.
Yeah.
And if you were going to build an eye, if you were going to intelligently design an eye, you wouldn't design it like ours is. You would design it more like a cephalopod eye is, because their veins don't obstruct their vision. They can't see the veins in their own eyes like we can.
So cephalopod would not see, like occasionally the veins in the back of my eye. Sometimes I can see those. Cephalopod wouldn't have that. Right?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess all I'm saying is that what I believe is that when something is developing like the eyes, the different parts are being put together to make a more efficient eye. And what's doing that? God's doing that.
I'm sorry, you are losing me. Say that, and also the audio is not good where you are. So say that again.
Is there too much echo?
It's possible, but just say that again.
When something develops, like say a squid eye or a human eye, the different parts have to be developed one at a time, so to speak. It takes a long time for them to develop. And that points to God, because God is adding the different parts.
Okay, so God is causing the mutation.
He's not doing it in a puff of smoke because he's not a wizard.
Okay, God is causing the mutations. God, you're telling me that God is causing the mutations.
One other thing.
But why would God create?
Why
would God create in all of these incremental points, right, where they have all these different varieties, and only give certain ones the advantage, just like a mutation would do, and it's caused by a mutation? So why did he ignore all of these other invertebrates and only give the really good eyes to the octopus based on those mutations? Why is he tinkering with their genetics over millions of years? Why would God do such tinkering to be exactly like evolution would do without a God? So that does not point to a God. And by the way, I found that article when Behe said Each and every element of the complex cascade of enzymes and cofactors must be in place for blood clotting to work. That's what he said. The court said, the evolution of complex molecular systems can occur in several ways. Natural selection can bring together parts of a system for one function at one time, and then at a later time recombine those parts with other systems of components to produce a system that has a different function. The complex biomechanical cascade resulting in blood clotting has been explained in this fashion.
Okay.
The ruling of the court. We therefore find that Professor Behe's claim for irreducible complexity has been refuted in peer-reviewed science research papers, and has been rejected by the scientific community at large. Additionally, even if irreducible complexity had not been rejected, it still does not support ID, as it merely a test for evolution, not design. So what you will not do is you will not admit that any of these things that point away from God point away from God. You just assume that everything that exists points to God because you assume that there's a God and that everything points to it. But you can't explain anything that does. If there was a God, you definitely could do that. But you're never going to allow yourself into a test position where you will critically examine your own position to say, what if there was a God, then we should expect this versus this, and how do we test for either one? And it's got to be potentially falsifiable. If there's no God, how would we know that?
Okay, if there was a God, what is it that I could point to?
I don't know. Because we don't have a God situation. We have where we know that evolution works. You said it can't work without a God, but it definitely does without a God.
I don't think it does without a God.
Yeah, you said it.
It's not something I can't prove. I can.
Yeah,
prove.
but you do think that you just lied again. You said you don't think it's with a God, but earlier you said that it can only work with a God, and you just now reiterated that you think that it works with a God. You said that you don't think that it works with a God, and then you said that it did work with a God.
I never said that I don't think it works with.
You said I didn't think
it works without a God.
You said you don't think that.
It works without a God. Maybe I was a slip of the tongue.
Okay. But you can't show. How would you test for a God?
How would I test? I don't think I could.
Yeah.
Except what I've already showed you.
Well, let's weigh multiple hypotheses at once. So evolution works without a God. We know this. Irreducible complexity has been disproved. The notion that God has to do the mutations, that he has to design mutations, that the population genetics does not reflect that. It certainly doesn't show that God is not adequately designing the cuttlefish, for example. I mean, why do they still have these super primitive eyes? Why does he only specialize
that already have super primitive eyes?
What?
I thought cuttlefish is a cephalopod. Am I right?
Octopus, and as you said, squids have better eyes, but you look at the cuttlefish, and their eyes are not so great. They're very primitive.
Their eyes are not so great. Okay.
Yeah, they're very primitive.
They may be more primitive stage that's still around.
Yes, so you would still have, just like you would expect of natural, unguided evolution, but not at all what we should expect of a guided evolution. And we shouldn't expect a guided evolution anyway. We should just expect created finished products, but that's not what we get. So now you've got a God who is a tinkerer, who doesn't know everything, who has to run countless experiments generation after generation, and still can't get anything right without being super complex and inefficient. And he's not necessary. So Occam's razor and Hitchens' razor both eliminate your God.
Well, it looks to me, when I study nature and watch nature films, that a lot of the things in nature really are pretty efficient.
If they had been intelligently designed, they would be much less. They would be less complex and more efficient.
Okay, I think I've explained why I don't think that would be so.
No, you haven't.
Because everything's complex. This is one point I wanted to make, I think, when we started, but I didn't get to, is that a lot of people use the teleological argument when it comes to the natural world, you know? You've heard that. Haven't you had people use that argument before?
Of
The
course.
Watchmaker? Sure.
Of course.
So, but they use it, they don't use it, they use it for the natural world, but they don't use it for the process of evolution. When I look at the evolutionary process, it looks to me like the fingerprints of God are all over the evolutionary process.
Because you come up with arguments like that it's complex,
Like
right? You think complexity implies God. Complexity actually points away.
I think it does. I think it implies a complex process too.
But it can be a complex process, but it doesn't imply a God. And these trial and error experiments, where most of them, the vast majority, and almost all of them, and in some cases all of them, are failures, that doesn't imply a God either. So you're looking for things in nature that you can't explain, and whatever you can't explain, you're going to say that's indicative of a God. But what would contradict God? So you want to put all these tests to evolution. How do we put a test to the God hypothesis? How do we eliminate that one? Let's weigh two hypotheses. God exists and does nothing outside of what evolution does naturally, what the natural world does without a God. So where is the indication that there's a God involved?
Well, I don't think without a God, I don't think evolution could even, or the formation of life could even get started.
All right. Well, we just
That's my opinion. I'm sorry.
We just had this conversation that it is inevitable. If you're going to have if you have replicating organisms, their replication is imperfect, then evolution is inevitable. Doesn't require a God, can't use a God. God clearly didn't do it. Anyway, I think we're done.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, was there anything else I was going to say?
No, I don't know. Go ahead and close up how you like.
It might have been, but I can't think of exactly what it was. Okay,
I just want to remind you that we talked about how evolution definitely does happen automatically without a God being necessary at all. And then instead of understanding that, you brought up the exact same argument again. So that I had to explain it again, that the population genetics, the way that these things diversify doesn't change. Don't need a God there. And I bet you're going to leave this conversation still thinking all the same things I have already corrected earlier today, which is frustrating. I'll share one other thing with you. When I was going for a science degree in biology, I remember taking these biology classes that these were the advanced courses, the ones only for science majors. And I remember that there was a time when I believed that there was a supernatural life force, like a lot of people do. A lot of people think that they have souls or whatever. And I remember thinking that. But I remember as I was sitting in these courses, where they're teaching how synapses work and how ATP and everything. I'm thinking, wow, there's not only is there no need for a supernatural aspect and an animating spirit, there's no room for one. It simply does not exist.
Oh yeah, one other thing. I think maybe you kind of answered this, but do you think evolution is wasteful?
Being that it is not guided, it is excessively wasteful. As I was explaining,
it seems like every animal has a purpose. Like I said, it fits into an ecological.
No animal has a purpose. They have a function.
Okay, whatever. I showed you that chart with the whales. Remember that?
Yes, and I brought up an example of one that was destined to fail from the beginning. Georgia Cetus, yeah. I gave you an example of one that was destined to fail from the beginning, as most of them ultimately were.
Couldn't it swim?
What?
Couldn't it swim?
It could swim. Yes, it could swim. Nowhere near as well as the tail propelled whales could do.
Okay,
there was not going to be a way. There's
how
not
competed
there was not going to be a way for Georgia cetus to ever excel the way tail-driven whales could.
it was an early experimentation.
Experimentation, a blind experiment, not a guided one,
Yeah,
and
I
an
was,
excessively wasteful one because the vast majority of everything goes extinct. Usually early on.
It's hard for me to think of animals that, like these, that they're just a waste. They had no purpose.
If people
The one I was going to
disappeared,
mention, go ahead.
if people disappeared tomorrow and we released all our dogs into the world, do you think we'd still have 200 breeds?
They would eventually interbreed and become more like wolves.
Well, no, they would diversify. But they would also reduce.
Yeah, you're right. According to the different environments, they would adapt to different environments.
You have things like dachshunds that would take on a badger type lifestyle, and you'd have mastiffs that are taking down one type of prey, and then you'd have others that were taking on some sort of a fox kind of thing. But the important thing is those are the general types, but the vast majority would just disappear. All these specialty breeds would flat out disappear, and you'd end up with a half a dozen or so generalized breeds. They wouldn't all be. They would have something like a wolf, but they wouldn't all turn into wolves. We've had several different types of dogs living in this continent at one time in the wild, and they weren't all wolves.
Oh,
Some of them were capable of taking down cattle.
some of the dog breeds that were developed could take
Well,
down cattle.
dog species. There used to be other species of dogs.
Aren't they all
There are different species of dogs now, but there used to be other species that are more diverse, more distant. Like for example, the dire wolf is not a wolf. The dire wolf is more. Yeah, the dire wolf is more closely related to the. I think it's a different
species of canine.
Yes, it's a species of canine, just like.
They found that there was one type subspecies of dire wolf that lived in Asia recently.
I haven't seen that.
Look it up. That they found some dire wolf fossils on the Asiatic continent.
Okay. The point is that you're still going to have diversity, but you're not going to have hundreds of breeds. Your Shih Tzu, your Pekingese, your Pomeranians, all those will end up being chew toys overnight. A whole lot of other dogs are too big. They're too specialized. They can't live as long. They get hip dysplasia. Without us to take care of them, nature is a horrible place to be. You get a moment of youth, and then an awful lot of suffering and pain.
I feel sorry for animals.
Yeah, everything in nature points away from God.
That would be from a benevolent God. And I'll admit, there's not too much I can say about that. That bothers me.
Yeah.
All right. It bothers me.
Yeah. Well, we're sitting on an hour right now, so I'll let you say whatever the last thing you want to close out with, and we can go.
Yes, there was something I was going to say. Oh, yeah. Have you read Dougal Dixon at all?
That name is not familiar.
He wrote After Man, a Zoology of the Future, describing what animals, like 50 million years old, what animals would be like.
Yeah.
Human beings and domestic animals died out. Rabbits took the place of gazelles. Rats took the place of wolves. Oh, he goes into a lot of detail with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Some rodents took on the niche of herons. There's an island called Batavia where bats got there instead of birds first, and the bats became developed into all these terrestrial niches. So it's full of things like that. So one thing he did say that ties in a little bit about what we were talking about was he has a short introduction at the beginning where he talks about, let's see, that evolution is a process of perfection, which I think something you would disagree with.
Is a process of,
is no creationist. I mean,
did you say process of perfection?
Process of perfection.
Yeah, I would definitely disagree with that.
And I guess as for what you say, I kind of agree with him because the eyes of cephalopods, eyes of humans get more and more efficient as time goes on.
But they never get perfection.
They also adapt to different environments. They're also branching out at the same time. So.
Yeah, improvement is not perfection.
Improvement. Oh, you know something? He said improvement. He didn't say perfection.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That's my bad. it was, I'm pretty sure it was improvement. It's improving all the time. And he said, and he did use the word perfection. Though he said, like the delicate sculpting of the monkey's foot. There, he gave some other examples. And how do you improve upon perfection? It's what he asked, what do you improve upon perfection? The answer would be, of course, when the environment changes, it's going to change. And, you know, from what I know about Dougal Dixon, he probably doesn't even believe in God. I would doubt it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think I'm about all argued out.
All right. Well, quite all right. I've got other projects that I've got to dive back into that I'm way behind always on everything. So thank you for being on. Thank you for the suggestion.
Okay.
Okay. We had like 170 some odd people watching this. So
is it going to be posted on there on a theistic evolution?
I'm sorry, what?
Is it going to be posted on Facebook under?
It's already, well, I can.
Oh, it's already there. People can call in. Okay.
I'll give you the link right now, but I mean, if
no,
it's
that's when I get home because I had to go to the library. My home computer won't work.
Okay. If you do this again, try to get a microphone, maybe a headset mic. Those are cheap.
Maybe a headset would be better. This computer, I don't think has one.
All right. Thank you much.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.